our project. The project supports a collaboration between Scottish universities and small to medium-sized enterprises to develop and test innovations for sustainable building design and refurbishment. The project is funded by European Regional Development Fund and the Scottish Government CIC program, which is currently managed by Scottish Funding Council. This is a live event, so if there is a fire alarm, we will have to stop, but we will resume later, and you are welcome to join us. If you cannot join us later, then you will be able to watch video recording of this webinar in due course. Our presentations will finish around 1:30, and after that Q&A session will start, and then our speakers will answer your questions. You can start asking questions by using chat facility at any time during this webinar, but the questions will be answered later. So the title of today's webinar is Assessment on the Choice of a Renewable Energy Source for Re-Tek. This is a study that was undertaken by Edinburgh Napier University for Re-Tek, and our speakers today are Julio Bros-Williamson of Edinburgh Napier University and Kevin Culligan of Re-Tek. And I would kindly ask now our speakers to begin with presentation.
Thank you very much, Branka. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As always, I'd like to always thank Kickstart for their funding and this opportunity to collaborate with Re-Tek in this project. As Branka has already pointed out, this project really looks at sourcing and looking at alternatives for renewable energy in an industrial unit, a warehouse occupied by Re-Tek, which will later on talk about their use and their operations in this warehouse. Just as a matter of kind of introduction, just to point out what we'll be talking about, we'll be just giving a brief introduction on the importance of these type of studies. Then we'll be looking at what actually Re-Tek is about and what they do, followed by just really looking at the methodology that we took in order to perform this study and the report that followed, and also looking at some of the results and some of the alternatives that we looked at in a bit more detail. And then some conclusions by both of us, myself and Kevin from Re-Tek. As mentioned, I mean, the feasibility study really focused on renewables, and it was looking at appropriate ways of implementing them onto a current warehouse, a current industrial unit. Re-Tek are an environmental recycling company, and they focus on recycling and the reuse of electrical elements, and there'll be a bit more on that. And from my part, from the Scottish Energy Centre, which is part of the energy from Edinburgh Napier University, we focus on energy elements in the built environment. As mentioned, I mean, just as a form of introduction, it's important to point out how it's key to address industrial units. It's key to address any commercial elements in the built environment. Currently, a lot of focus is towards domestic buildings, both in the new builds and the retrofit. And it's important to still look at industrial, commercial and maybe office buildings as also a key element on the reduction of carbon emissions in our built environment. This study looked at ways of reducing energy and depending on fossil fuel energy for this business, and together with the warehouse and its surroundings, we looked at alternatives into it. So we focused on energy, we focused on reducing that carbon footprint of the building and the users of that building, and also for the good of the company as well, looking at lowering the energy bills, both gas and electricity. As we know, a lot of industries are being asked by the government. There's a lot of pressure out there for a lot of industries and a lot of businesses to, in a way, green up and become a bit more sustainable, both in their operations and also in their premises. So it's a focus that we have to look into in order to improve the industries that surround us and that benefit Scotland. And we can do that by reducing the carbon footprint in many ways. And looking at ways of energy efficiency around buildings, around the occupiers, and how well they use energy is quite important. Looking at fabric improvements, that's been quite a big focus and quite important in domestic, but it's equally important in non-domestic, in warehouses, where a lot of the structures are light constructions. And that's something that has to be addressed. Zero or low carbon technologies are also implemented, which is part of this study. Looking at minimising environmental impacts of the sites and of the work that's in a lot of these buildings. And as I mentioned before, looking at behavioural patterns of energy use, quite important. I'd like to pass on the microphone to Kevin from ReTek, who will talk a bit about ReTek and its operations.
Oh, thanks, Julio. Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Culligan of ReTek UK. I'm a co-founder and currently a director at ReTek UK. And thanks to Branca and Julio for the introduction. It makes this a lot easier for me. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about my business and where we came from, and give you more of an insight of why it was such a considerable decision for us to take to do what we did regarding alternative energy for the business we're in. So I'll just start from the beginning. ReTek were a group of companies were founded in 1996. We were found to be supporting a very large ICT and telecom manufacturing business in Western Europe, in North America and in Europe. We had a number of sites throughout the world. Very small company, but privately owned, but the business was such, it was a global business. And we supported global technology manufacturers. What we've done is we recovered value for their end-of-life material, manufacturing fallout. We made it commercially viable by repairing it and selling it into the grey market for them in a controlled, secure fashion. But from that, reuse, which they preferred to do, obviously because of the income benefit, the commercial benefit from it, there's also a recycling portion that had to be done. And from that, we had to develop our recycling skills, as a lot of the founders and directors came from a strong electronic background, with absolutely no knowledge of the recycling industry at that time. So when we did establish a business, the whole process of finding out what items had to be recycled and what could be reused from a commercial basis on a worldwide basis was quite a challenge. So our business has went through many changes, and it's probably well noted that the ICT and global technology manufacturing moved east, firstly to Eastern Europe and then on to China. And with that came a downturn in business for us. And we had to look at other income sources that were complementary or related to maintain our business. And in that, we found that we could probably do the same for any business that used ICT equipment or any technological item to be recycled or reused, as we did for the global technology manufacturers. With the introduction of the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive out of the European Union about 5 or 6 years ago in the UK, it provided a kind of impetus or momentum to offer these services to any sort of business. and as such we introduced the whole recovery and reuse of installed technology, PCs, laptops, printers, mobile phones to brand new sectors. They were used to throwing their stuff effectively into the skip and seen into landfill. We went and engaged with them and provided solutions within the oil, gas sector, public sector, banking sector, and started to build up our business again associated with the disposal of these items through reuse and recycling. So again, just like with global manufacturing technology companies, we provide a commercially viable, environmentally responsible solution for them. So depending on the sector these companies operated in, we could design very specific customised solutions for them. And not all of them, all the items could be reused. Some of the technologies were a lot older and they did have to be recycled in conventional ways. As we developed a reuse sector, we realised that the export market was going to be the biggest target for these reuse items. PCs that are 3 or 4 years old still have a lot of life left in them. Laptops included, printers as well, even some spare parts associated with it. And we developed overseas markets in emerging economies such as India and Brazil, North Africa and Eastern Europe. However, we did maintain a very strong recycling ethos in that we wouldn't export anything that couldn't be reused, that wasn't functional, by recycling it within the UK, and we still do that to this day. So as the business grew, we had the need to have a facility that was custom designed or built to our specifications, and we'd done that about 5 or 6 years ago. And we went ahead and we built a 22,000 square foot facility, which is located in East Kilbride, to process all the incoming equipment that was disposed of from the various industry sectors that I outlined earlier. Although recycling is environmentally responsible and the security or the audit process, we audit upon ourselves to make sure it's done in the UK, it also has high energy demands, and it wasn't something that was considered really with conventional energy in mind when we had this facility built, the warehouse and the offices for us. And as our kind of progressive environmental management system dictated to us year on year that it had to be updated, then in the increase in price of conventional fuel, or fossil fuels, then we've seen that the energy demands associated with the whole reverse logistics process associated with dealing with people's disposals, then we had to look at some sort of alternative on it, but we also had to consider the commercial spend and looking for a reasonable return on the investment for it. So what we've done is we engaged with Scottish Enterprise, who support local businesses within Scotland, and they referred us to Kickstart, who, in conjunction with the Institute for Sustainable Construction, which is Julio's department, conducted a feasibility study for us, which Julio is going to outline for you in a second. And the study was to assess our energy requirements and recommend renewable alternatives for our operating site for our warehouse and offices.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. I think I'll just briefly talk about what the real focus was. I've mentioned some of the points before. I mean, it's to do with lowering the dependence on electricity and any fossil fuels from the grid, and looking at alternatives in renewable technology. Lowering bills was really important, and also having these enhanced environmental credentials for the company. I think that was quite important for them to bring that into their operational side of things. The objectives, just briefly, I mean, we had to make an evaluation of a building and the site, looking at their current energy use, also looking at any restrictions that we could have. That was kind of part of the objective, to look at the building, evaluate it and see how well it could adapt into any possible technology. Looking at obviously payback periods and investment. That's really key in any technology that's implemented into a business. You've got to give some indication of capital costs. You've got to give some indication on paybacks with any funding or without, and just seeing how maybe by reducing fuel bills, there could be a significant payback on that. Looking at carbon savings as well, and just looking at, with investment, in line with investment, it's really important. Looking at funding mechanisms in order to fund some of, or partially some of the technology being implemented at whatever stage, whether it's for maintenance purposes, whether it's for the capital costs, etc. Looking at alternatives that can not just be a burden to the company, that can really influence them to engage into this technology. And then looking at steps of design and adapting the fabric to this technology that we might suggest. So the way we kind of engaged with the company and Kevin, we looked upon a site visit where we looked at the restrictions around the building, and looking at the current energy use, whether it's in the offices or whether it's in the operational side of things in the plant and in the warehouse. Looking at any high points within the energy use, whether there are any elements that could be reduced directly without active solutions, looking at more passive and more lightweight solutions. We'll also look a deep analysis and quite an interesting analysis on the energy bills themselves, both the electricity and the gas, looking at obviously patterns of use and through the energy bills and graphing them. A photographic survey was quite interesting to later look into, and obviously looking at any other sources which were part of the feasibility, and expand on them. So moving on to the site itself and the building and the warehouse itself, as we can see in the image in the bird's eye view of the site, it's currently situated in an industrial estate in East Kilbride, and it's surrounded by quite a heavily industrialised units around it. I think Sainsbury's are the main players in that industrial estate. So it's, I mean, compared to other sites, this site is relatively small to the occupancy of other sites. But nevertheless, this warehouse is operational and very nicely accessed to in terms of any communication, etc. The site itself in red there's two warehouses on it. The one at the back that I've shown is a ReTek one, and at the front there's another business. But nevertheless, it's nicely situated with little kind of other industrial estates and other buildings surrounding it. The building itself, the warehouse, as we can see at the back is where most of the offices are. It's a two-storey ground floor and first floor set of offices, with the main entrance to the north of the building, and the rest of the site is for the operational and the storage and access to the warehouse. Some images of the external and exterior and the surroundings of the building. The first image in the top left is the main entrance to the offices and the kind of entrance corridor. Following on to the right and top right is kind of the main access to the site itself, both for lorries and staff. The lower left, we can see how access to the warehouse itself through lorries, and then this kind of main door and industrial kind of access to it, both for offloading and loading any equipment that can take away. So we can see it's quite an extensive warehouse and its surroundings, with some limitations on space for other renewables that could be kind of incorporated. There's little kind of space that can be kind of modified in that sense for any technology, but we'll talk about that later on. Some images internally, so the data handling units and areas within the warehouse. Also this electrified, operational kind of door for the warehouse, charging up for forklifts and electrical equipment, etc., which is quite important for the operation of the warehouse. The top left image is the gas meter, where the gas could. The mains enters a building. We can see on the right the boiler, which services the space heating and any water heating requirements for the offices mainly. And the lower left-hand side, we can see the the heating source, space heating source for the warehouse itself. There's 4 of these, and they're electrically sourced and operated. So we can see a couple of elements of the warehouse and how they use most of the electricity and some of the kind of needs for its operation. So the need for electricity is really mainly for this erasing data and the use of computing equipment within the services that ReTek provide. They've got some powerful computers that obviously need constant operation and electrical use, and also ventilation, which is really important when there's a lot of electrical equipment and computing equipment, in order for their operation and to be for longer periods to be adequate enough. There's also the industrial warehouse doors that need to be operated in different times of the day, and I've mentioned the forklifts that have to be constantly charged up for use. But in general terms, we're talking about computing equipment, the ventilation, the forklifts, any secondary machinery that's needed for erasing or separating elements, etc., of the equipment. The space heating within the warehouse, and also office equipment and any lighting. So as I mentioned before, we did a kind of analysis of the energy use, both its operational and also in terms of the energy bills, and obviously separating the electrical side of things to the gas demand and the gas bills. We can see there's throughout the year there's a continuous use of electricity, more I would say during the winter period, but it's quite constant throughout the year. And in terms of gas, which is used mainly for water and space heating, we can look at the winter period when it's mostly been used, which obviously comes in line with temperatures and outside climate. But we can see quite a lot of electricity being used and gas, totaling to 160,000 kilowatt hours per year, both electricity and gas, which can be quite a lot for an industrial unit of this size. So the focus, obviously, after this analysis is really to look at ways of lowering this dependence on electricity and gas, and looking at ways in which we can limit and lower energy bills in this case. So we did a kind of wide analysis, taking into consideration the site, the building, and the use of the warehouse, and looked at various renewables. Some were not adequate, and some were. The ones that we didn't look at, hydroelectric devices, for obvious reasons. There aren't any meaningful water sources that can really power any electricity and obtain some benefit from it. Ground and air source heat pumps were not, although they're very ideal devices and technology and can really help in minimizing the dependence on electricity and gas. Because of the site itself and any site restraints, it was difficult to really look at ways in which we could implement and retrofit the building to a kind of heat pump, air source or ground source heat pump. So it was difficult to kind of look at ways in which we could incorporate that technology. But what we did analyse were solar PVs on the roof, looking at solar thermal as a backup for maybe water heating in the offices. We did explore wind and looked at ways in which wind could be part of it, although there are some limitations to it, and also the site and also biomass and a mini CHP, a mini combined heat and power unit that could maybe substitute the use of the current boiler for space heating, and maybe look at ways in which that can be implemented into the office use mainly. So looking at solar photovoltaics, I'm going to run through most of these alternatives, looking at mainly the feasibility of them, looking at ways in which the capital cost throughout its span of life, together with feed-in tariffs and any other funding, that this could be kind of implemented and obviously obtain paybacks through it. We also looked at this technology, well, all of the alternatives, at looking at the sizing of them and looking at ways in which they would incorporate to the actual building. So back to solar panels, we use a software called PVSYST that analyzes roof square meters of the buildings and looks at ways in which solar panels can be implemented onto the roof with different information that we obtained through site visits and any other further analysis, looking at the tilt of the roof, the pitch, and any orientation towards southern orientations, and depending on how well it's and how close it is orientated to the south, it will give us an efficiency on the amount of energy that can be produced given that orientation. So in this case, the main inclination of the roofs was not a true south, but nevertheless it did contribute quite a lot to energy. It did produce energy. There aren't any restrictions in terms of shading. The building is not heavily. It's not located in a heavily dense area where there's higher buildings around it or vegetation that could cast some shadow. So there's quite a good approach on the solar panels. And we obviously looked at the size and the limitations on the roof, and the different technologies, whether they were monocrystalline or polycrystalline, and there was different approaches to what was best in terms of cost as well. So we know there's been this shift from feed-in tariffs. Last year and early parts of this year, there was quite an attractive feed-in tariff per kilowatt hour being produced. But currently, and we don't know how these tariffs will end up, but currently there's kind of like a reduced tariff that really makes any investor into solar PV think twice on whether it's a good idea or not. But nevertheless, we did a feasibility study looking at the current tariffs and tried to make an economic analysis from that. We looked at two approaches and two kind of sizes of the systems. The first one is kind of looking at a smaller system that really would require 51 modules. Each of them, in this case, I mean, there could be other alternatives, but in this case, what we looked at was a 190 watt system that will, together with the software that we used and the input that we added, would be producing annually around, well, just under 7,000 kilowatt hours, which can be quite substantial amount. But compared to the actual needs of the building, is really not contributing quite an awful lot. But nevertheless, it's helping a certain percentage. But in this case, we're talking about a polycrystalline set of panels around, well, there's 51 modules and taking up from the roof space around 70 square meters in total. As you can see, this image that we've got here underneath the table, the summary table, is one of the pitches of the roof of the warehouse, taking into consideration the skylights that are located in the centre of each eave of the and each roof side, and building and locating these panels above and below those, and trying to get as high efficiency as can be possible. These are estimated figures. I mean, just under 7,000 kilowatt hours per year, but nevertheless an interesting kind of approach. Looking at the payback, we've got standard prices through manufacturers of PV panels, and we try and be as accurate as possible in terms of costing each panel and each system. And once we've got that information together with the annual output of electricity from the PV panels, we can obtain some payback areas and payback solutions. In this case, in this example, we're talking about a payback around 12 to 13 years, which, I mean, it's quite a high investment of just under £30,000 for those 51 panels. And the right-hand side graph shows us really this progression of how the costs would pay back together with maintenance and together with any inverter replacement. We can see after about 6 years, 7 years, and after 15 years, there's kind of like a step down. That really looks at an inverter replacement if there was the need for one, which obviously needs an extra investment. So together with the feed-in tariffs, together with the electrical bills that can be saved, at the, around 11, 12 years payback for this system. We did the same thing for a larger kind of system, looking at just over 160 modules of 280 watt panels, and it gives us a system of 45 watt peak, and that gave us just over 32,000 kilowatt hours per year, which obviously it's a larger system. We've got a larger output, but obviously there's more of an investment. There's more of a capital investment into the system. And these are just two parameters, a smaller system compared to a larger, kind of more extensive system that can be on. And this takes up, taking into consideration the roof itself, around 230 square metres of the roof, of one of the sides of the roof. So again, we did the same analysis in terms of its cost effectiveness. In this case, the inverter replacement isn't that, it doesn't show that significant, but nevertheless it's there. And we can see that the capital investment into it is just under £100,000 for the whole set of the whole system. And in this case, because we're generating more, we're obtaining a larger feed-in tariff, the payback is slightly less, around 8 years. So although it's a larger investment, the payback can be shorter. But obviously that will depend on what option to go into and whether that's a good investment. We looked also at wind turbines together with the EETC climate change kind of database, the wind database. We managed to pinpoint the location of the warehouse, and at different heights within that location, we would obtain a wind speed, an average wind speed that can be later on fed into a wind system that can give us an estimated output of energy. We looked at two alternatives, again, a larger unit and then a more modest and I would say a more cost attractive system. We looked at a large 12-metre 10 kilowatt turbine, which can be quite a big cost. That can generate up to nearly 35,000 kilowatt hours, which is quite a lot per year. And looking at ways of maybe exporting 20% of it and also 80% being used by the feed-in tariff on obtaining around £12,000 per year in order to obtain a good payback. We also engaged into a 5 kilowatt one, which I would say is better suited for this site in terms of its size and in terms of any site limitations. But nevertheless, it still needs it's still got some restrictions for location. So a 5 kilowatt one with a 9-metre mast height would give us just over 15,000 kilowatt hours. So less of an energy income, but obviously a smaller unit and probably best suited for this site. So we looked at how both with the feed-in tariff and the energy saving on the bills, we would obtain roughly about just over £5,000 benefit per year towards the cost of that capital investment. So again, we focused on the current feed-in tariffs, looking at ways in which we can implement those and obviously come into benefit. We are a bit sceptical about whether we should implement wind turbines in this site. Although we are close to very important wind farms in the White Hill nearby, and there's obviously an attractive wind situation. Because of the site restrictions, because of the mast and the actual equipment itself, we find that it might not be suited to this site appropriately. So a bit of scepticism in whether this is best for the site, but nevertheless could play a good reduction in electricity. Solar thermal, I mentioned that we were going to be using solar thermal mainly for water heating within the building and the offices mainly, and obviously only at certain times in the year when really you've got a higher efficiency and water can be kept at higher temperatures and can be heated at higher temperatures during the summer. Mainly for toilets and kitchens and obviously the water use. And also looking at implementing it at the back where the offices are located and tilted as best as possible towards a southern orientation. At the moment, I mean, the tilt of the actual roof is not sufficient, and the efficiency wouldn't be that adequate. But we suggest improving the tilt of these panels to 20%, which is kind of from 20% to up to about 30 degrees. We would obtain a better efficiency from the panels. Oh, yeah, thank you. So that would be our suggestion. We would be looking at evacuated tube system. We feel that that's a more efficient way of producing and heating up energy with a 20 tube panel system, and we're looking at maybe having 10 panels at the most, really, to fulfil most of the energy here, and obviously tap into the renewable heat incentive in order to get some incentive through there and lower the payback period of this investment. I mean, we've got different rough estimates on the potential of heating of water in that location and that tilt, etc. Again, we've got software that could simulate this and have some outputs. I mean, with a 10 panels of these evacuated tubes, we're looking at just under 2,000 kilowatts per year of heated water, which could, I mean, represents roughly around 10% of the warehouse gas demand. So we're lowering at least around 10% of that use. And again, it would be mainly for water heating. So again, we did, just like in the solar panels, we conducted a cost analysis and looking at the payback. The system, I mean, 10 panels with the feed-in tariff, with the possible gas saving on the energy bills, we're looking at around 10 years of payback with a capital cost of just over £10,000, both for the panels and the installation. I mean, we're looking at, obviously, throughout the span of the renewable heat incentive, also to obtain some income through whatever is produced throughout the year, and which can come up to, if it continues and if that tariff continues, just over £30,000 in order to pay the system. And that includes the payback period of those initial £10,000 for the systems. So again, it's if analysed in terms of the economic side of things, and looking at ways in which it can be implemented for water heating, it could be a good and fast, effective approach and technology. And taking on other feasibility studies that we conducted on other technology that we thought was suited for this site. We looked at biomass, and we also looked at combined heat and power. And the way we looked at that, we looked at micro CHP mainly, which would really substitute the current gas boiler and bring in a more efficient system that can not only produce heat for water, for space heating, but can also do a certain percentage of electrical energy, and obviously contribute on lighting probably, or contributing on other uses throughout the warehouse. So we looked at this micro combined heat and power system, and especially we focused on a 2 kilowatt system that could be powered by natural gas, but obviously be more efficient than a conventional boiler. And looking at the feed-in tariff, that could give us around 11 pence per kilowatt hour produced. So again, very, very interesting to include that into the economic analysis of it. So with this kind of 2 kilowatt system, we looked at and calculated around 5,000 kilowatt hours being produced per year. And we located the most efficient one for this size of offices as a Stirling type combined heat and power system that really is quite effective because it takes it's a small time to warm up and heat up the water compared to any other systems. So that's why we looked at this one. The investment roughly between £4,000 and £5,000, and we were looking at an income of around £500 with the electricity savings of 600. So again, around 4 years payback time in an investment like this. Obviously, it's not 100% renewable. We are still relying on gas, but it's more efficient in the way we produce heat and electricity. So around 10 years, 4 years payback, and I would say this is quite an effective way of using and producing energy. And I mean, most of these systems produce, it's a 6-in-1 system, so it would produce 6 kilowatt hours of heat, and with that 6 kilowatt hours produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. And they can only produce electricity if thermally, if it's actually producing and heating up water. It can't produce electricity on its own. But again, during the winter periods when space heating is needed quite extensively, 1 kilowatt hour for every 6 is quite good. Following this, we also looked at biomass boilers, looking at a wood pellet or log-fired. I mean, we would prefer a wood pellet because it uses smaller storage units. And we looked at quite a large system, a 30 kilowatt boiler system, biomass system, really to take charge of the majority of the gas needs in the winter period, mainly for space heating and water heating, and could come in combination with the solar thermal, but we looked at this independently and really assessed it that way. It would need around 17 tonnes of wood per year at a cost of around £175 per tonne. That's around £3,000 of wood pellets, £3,000 worth of wood pellets per year, which you've got to compare with the gas savings and see if that's effective or not. And this would produce around 72,000 kilowatt hours per year. They're quite efficient, 92% efficient. So it's really taking quite a big percentage of the gas needs for the offices, space heating and the rest. With a payback roughly of 8 years, I think, and I mean a capital investment of around 24,000. But essentially, we are dealing with a big amount of gas that could be saved through a biomass. So just as a matter of conclusions, really, wrapping up the technology that we looked at, we do have quite a large energy need within the building. There's, in combination with the business use and the offices, we're talking about 160,000 kilowatt hours of energy and a great deal of carbon emissions. We looked at, obviously, other alternatives, not just the renewables, but also looking at basic energy management, which is key for any business. Taking in line new technology and also trying to get people into this energy saving side of things, being more efficient with the use of energy, being installing more efficient sensors for boilers and for the production of electricity and gas, and being more efficient in the use of it, in lighting efficiency, etc. So that was also part of the study, looking at ways in which the users can also save energy through behavioural studies, behavioural elements. We recommend that I mean, we look at accredited installers, MCS accredited installers, in order to take this forward, and also be a bit more specific on the technical elements of the roofs in terms of the structure, ability of the roofs before installing any panels, etc. But the summary table we can see in this slide really looks at all the energy that could be produced per year for every system. And obviously this is very useful for Kevin and ReTek to really pinpoint what can be dealt with first and what technology can be incorporated first in terms of any budgets that they may have, any restraints on that. And obviously look at what the paybacks would be and have this vision of investment, which is key in any business. So, I mean, there's different schemes, different packages really that could be implemented. I mean, I've got two examples that not necessarily the ones that ReTek took forward, but some that could be interesting. We've got the smaller investment with maybe the small systems that I've explained before, with the small PV, the small wind turbine, the smaller the CHP, with a total saving of around 36,000 kilowatt hours per year, but with a quite high investment given the technology, with around 70,000, with not very high returns. But if we look at maybe a bigger investment, which will obviously depend on the company, with the larger solar PV system, looking at the biomass, which is taken into account 70%, or close to 70% of the gas needs, and with this in mind, it's obviously going to be a higher investment around the 100,000 mark, but you're going to get quite higher returns, bigger returns on the electrical use and the gas use. So although it's a bigger investment, you're getting quite a considerable return. And obviously trying to keep in mind the carbon emissions and the carbon footprint reductions, and this focus that we had in this report of trying to lower the dependence of fossil fuels to a certain percentage. And then I'll pass over to Kevin to really talk about his conclusions and ReTek and how they've taken it forward.
Thanks again, Julio. As you can see, the feasibility study was very thorough and very extensive. When we first embarked on this, I had no idea about the information I would get out from it. But I was very impressed with the detailed information that came out of it, albeit that it presented a lot more questions than I expected to be washed up on it. But what really crystallised from it was what Julio has went over already, in that it focused our actually resource and energy activity on both gas and electrical. And initially, from the recommendations from the feasibility study, I wanted to kind of adopt a two-prong approach for taking out or mitigating where both gas and electrical demands were at. I've seen the electrical demand growing because the business was growing. It was growing at a good rate, and as such, I've seen the electrical demand would grow a lot more than the actual gas demand, even though the gas at 100,000 kilowatts was the biggest use of energy per annum for the facility. So we weighed up all the recommendations and all the renewals that Julio's report had outlined, and we initially looked at a small biomass to tackle some of the gas demand, and we looked at a PV option, probably a small option, to take out the electrical reliance and probably the growth where that would be in for that type of fuel. So we also looked obviously at the costing associated with these investments, and we looked at the FIT tariffs associated with PV option. We looked at the RHI tariffs associated with the the gas alternatives, and we even looked at the wind as well. The wind we excluded very early on. The site layout is a little bit awkward. It wasn't built with that in mind, even though we are by probably one of the largest wind farms in Europe. But as such, the layout with our neighbours and the proximity to the building, it wasn't conducive to put a wind turbine in there. So we were focused mainly on biomass and on PV option. The PV option, very undisruptive, very large roof area, so it lent itself very much for getting on with it on the roof, get it installed. But we just felt that the actual efficiencies of a PV option versus a biomass wasn't really getting us the kilowatt alternatives that we actually needed. So we looked at a larger capital investment, balanced in the return on investment, and we also had to weigh in what the company's environmental goals were, because we're working in a sector that promoted our environmental credentials. We've seen that a larger biomass option solely without PV would provide about 50% of the facility's current power, that is gas and electrical together. That would be nearly about 80,000 kilowatts. Whereas the joint option with the biomass and the PV option would probably only come to 30%. That would be with a smaller biomass boiler. I already spoke about the installations marketing opportunity for the company to most core business. So with that all in mind, we decided to launch a procurement process to feel out what sort of costs would be associated with, even though Julio's report did kind of touch on the cost of a larger biomass, and that was done in May 2012, just last month. So from that procurement process, we went out to a number of vendors, UK vendors, and they came back, and we eventually settled with a 60 kilowatt biomass option, and that was chosen in conjunction with 2 fan coil heaters, which would replace 2 existing gas heaters in the warehouse. But the biomass would also take up the whole heating and hot water costs associated with the office space. The manufacturer of the biomass was an Austrian manufacturer called Winhager, and we estimated that running about 1,314 hours per annum, it would generate some 79,000 kilowatt hours of power, burning about some 1,300 tonnes of wood pellets. We estimated this would result in a saving of CO2 emissions of around 28 tonnes per annum, and running at this rate, about 1,314 hours, generating this kind of kilowatt hours, we reckoned that we would qualify for Tier 1 tariff of the RHI rate, which would probably give us a feed-in of about 8.3 pence per kilowatt hour. This would give us a net fuel saving on the gas, and we reckoned with projections that this investment would be paid for in approximately 6 years. We awarded the business to a local vendor, and the boiler is on schedule to be installed and operational by the 30th of June. It's currently actively being installed at the moment. The other conclusions we found from the report is that the new alternatives would be implemented into the company's environmental policy, which didn't have any of this content, which means that the report that Julio has done in that, considering all the renewables, then we could look at, with the company's growth over the coming years, then we could consider the other options for other renewables for mitigating the remainder of the fossil fuel energy requirements. And this will be done again about this time next year. We still are moderately deciding for next year about PV panel installation, but we just feel that the cost must come down further for the product to be economically feasible, because we felt their efficiency was not good enough, and as the FIT tariffs are changing, then it really has to balance out to make that a feasible installation. So that concludes my part with the actual active outputs associated with the whole project. It was a very worthwhile exercise to follow through, and as you can see, there's some active outputs that we're actually utilising, and hopefully we're going to see the benefits of this decision for years to come.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Julio. And we have quite a few questions, especially from one viewer, Tony Culligan of Tony's House Info. He is starting with questions about the building itself, probably something that some other viewers would also ask, but this is what his first question. Did you consider building a low-energy building when it was built? You mentioned, I think, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, it was nearly 6 years ago now, yeah.
6 years ago. So at that time, how much attention was paid to building a low-energy building, well-insulated building?
It was embarrassingly neglected. Okay. The focus at that time was on the business was changing significantly. I think I related to that in my introduction. And what happened was we were currently running from a rented building. Although we're working in the environmental sector, the much more prevalent considerations around sustainability weren't the main profile or considerations at that point in time. So it wasn't considered at that point. So it was installed purely on an economical considered basis.
Yes. So, well, another comment from Tony Cowling. How to reduce energy use of heating, insulate and air seal. Did you air seal or do an air tightness test? What are the U values for the walls and roof? If not, why not?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't look at fabric at this stage. I mean, the focus of the study was looking at alternatives and renewables. But I understand Tony's approach. It's fabric first, definitely, before any technology and renewable. And obviously that in mind, that it makes sense. You're reducing the demand through energy efficiency. Therefore, you reduce on the actual fabric, on the actual technology output and the rest. Sadly, the focus here was looking at alternatives of technology. It wasn't part of the scope really to look at fabric alternatives.
But you can do that now. Do you
Sure,
plan
absolutely.
to?
Yeah. I mean, the whole study has thrown up so much that wasn't on a kind of profile of consideration, and as such, we have a growing environmental management system that certainly has room to discover all that scope. And with that, apart from the environmental impact, the confluence is that we can also make great marketing hype out of it as well, because of the business sector that we operate in.
Another question from Tony Cowling. Are payback periods really that irrelevant, and over what time scale did you look at these? Over the life of the building?
No, we took them more in the basis of the renewable heat incentive and the feed-in tariffs and those periods, and it was basically on that basis, on how the tariffs would help us to do the payback, not so much on the building use and any future patterns, and whether it was going to be change of use or change of hand or anything like that. It was mainly
And the comment on the choice, final choice. Did you consider the air quality implications of using wood or biomass?
No, I'm aware of quite interesting studies of that. The location of the warehouse isn't in a kind of suburban kind of location where air quality would be an issue. therefore it would be suited, but we didn't expand it any more on looking at technology that would maybe produce and have a better air quality output. But we purely looked at the feasibility study of the equipment, of the technology, energy output. Really.
Okay. And where would you source the wood pallets? Can you source them here in Scotland?
Yeah, you can. There are a number of companies. Obviously, it's a growing sector, and you can source them here in Scotland. My installer has a short list of the companies that they recommend. One of them, I believe, I've been doing it for some time. They're called Forever Fuel. They're a company based out of Kent, but they also have a presence here in Scotland.
And how disruptive is the whole process now for the business itself?
Yeah, I mean, the disruption was a factor because obviously it's a commercially active site with a fair number of employees and processing a lot of material. And now, if it was in December and January, I would have thought the disruption would be a crucial consideration, because the fact that we have to put in replacement fan coil heaters and a replacement boiler. We have to rerun pipes as such, so there is a fair bit of disruption going on. Fortunately for us, we have a facility that can accommodate that, but in December it would be very disruptive because there'd be a lot of downtime associated with the existing fuel source.
So could you tell us if you know about any funding that is available for these types of installations for businesses? Did you have had any help there?
Yeah, there is a lot of help out there, and the site that we were referred to by our installers is the Traco site, and on the Traco site outlines the whole process associated with the funding and the rates associated with the borrowing on your investment, etc. I can provide that. It also gives you the all sorts of other interesting information associated with renewables regarding FIT tariffs, RHI tariffs and calculators, etc. So there's a lot of information on that site which we used a lot to help us make our final decision.
The Energy Saving Trust Scotland is also granting to small businesses up to, well, from £1,000 to, depending on the feasibility studies and all that, and they're quite good funding streams, and so the enhanced capital allowances that can give you up to 100% tax-free relief tax relief incentives on the purchase of technology. So
and some of you've hit on it. Obviously, I meant to cover my presentation. I must have skipped over it. Was with the actual cost of the installation, it also provides a degree from a commercial point of view, a capex benefit in that it's tax deductible on the kind of operating profit of the company.
So Energy Saving Trust offers funding for technology support. What about retrofit of the existing buildings? Do they also support that? For small businesses?
As far as I know, they do, but they focus more on domestic at this stage. But there are some schemes that look into smaller industrial units, but that would have to be explored.
We do not have any questions still from our audience. Any other questions? So could you tell us more about the future plans? Is it retrofit now of the building, the next stage, or what else?
I think we have to get at least 12 months under our belt to see how these figures stack up. But certainly, as I said earlier, we have a very tactile environmental management system, and certainly this has opened our eyes. This whole feasibility studies opened our eyes to many things, many considered solutions associated with it, and there's absolutely nothing barred on it. I think the outputs we've got in such a short time are considerable, and I think it's time with it ongoing any plans for any other improvements. But we have to draw our breath to a degree and see how we go on with this, and review it year on year.
but probably it would make more
Absolutely.
savings
I think so.
if you insulate well, first
Sure.
of all, the
Yeah.
existing building, and then
I totally agree.
take on
totally agree.
technologies. Okay, well, if you don't have any other comments or suggestions, we do not have any more questions from our viewers, so we can now close the seminar, but I would first of all like to thank you both for your presentations and to our online viewers for the questions. And now I would like to draw attention to our other activities. We have received a number of reports on completed feasibility studies and academic consultancies, and we will be organizing and advertising dissemination of their outcomes through our webinars as soon as we agree suitable dates with all our speakers. As only our members in Scotland were able to attend our 2 live conferences, we have filmed them, and now DVDs of the 2 conferences held in Glasgow in February this year are now available. The first conference focused on air quality in housing, and the second one on sustainable refurbishment in traditional buildings, including a talk on Green Deal financing scheme. These 2 DVD packs contain more than 20 presentations, offering really an excellent value for money for all organizations that organize continuous professional development for their staff. Of course, these DVDs could also be used in teaching at universities, and we would be very happy to know if any universities or colleges are interested and will be using these DVDs in teaching. Each conference DVD set is priced at £79 plus VAT, and the pack containing both conferences, in total 7 DVDs, is available for £109 plus VAT. Wherever possible, the presentation within the DVDs show each slide in a large format, providing really excellent visibility of the text, of the charts and images. The speakers are also visible in a smaller frame. For more information and to purchase these DVDs, please go to our website homepage. We look forward to welcoming you at our forthcoming events, and thank you for watching this webinar.